Hello, Colin Wright. Thank you so much for joining me on The Same Drugs. I'm looking forward to talking with you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun.
Yeah. So, how are you feeling over there? I know that you've been through what I would consider a stressful situation lately.
Yeah, so I assume you're referring to the the PayPal Etsy stuff that's been going on.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I guess for people that don't know, Colin here was just banned from both PayPal and Etsy, which of course cuts off a source of funding. I'm not sure how significant for you, but for some people that would be a pretty big hit.
yeah. It wasn't. So I mean, there's a way that it's fortunate that it happened when it did. I suppose. Like I get most of my income through Substack, so they're a pretty good free speech platform. They've resisted some people trying to cancel them for hosting horrible people like Jesse Singal, and so they're pretty safe. Then they use a payment processor called Stripe, which they've also sort of been like, we're upholding free speech. We're not going to cancel people. We're nonpartisan. But for people who wanted just to donate, just to support, and they didn't really care about my Substack, I had PayPal that was an option. I didn't have a whole lot of people like donating. There was a group of people that were donating monthly and stuff, but it wasn't like such a substantial portion of my income that I come to rely on. It was just like a nice bonus at the end of the month or something. And just out of the blue, I just received an email from PayPal saying, you can no longer do business with PayPal. And they wouldn't say why. And when I gave them a call to ask why, the lady on the phone, she's super nice. She said, though, that someone in this other department would send me an email. And then that email never showed up. And instead, I got a message through like the PayPal app that was saying, essentially, if you want to get any information on a customer, including myself, I would need a legal subpoena to do it. They didn't cite any like violation of like a policy or anything like that. Like they said, it could either be some business thing that was bad or whatever, or we deemed it too risky. That was like all they said. So pretty broad. But the Etsy thing, so then I got banned by Etsy. They at least cited like a policy saying that I was glorifying violence and hatred against protected groups, even though they never had pointed to anything that I had doing that. And if you look at the merchandise I had for sale, it's literally just like it says the name of my Substack, which is Reality's Last Stand, and then it has like a male and female symbol. Like that's the extent of what I had on there, just various types of merchandise with that. Usually Etsy will give people like a 3-strike rule. They'll be like, this specific item that you have on your store is violating our policies. They'll disable that one, but they'll give you like these, repeated offenses may result in a permanent ban. I had never had even a warning on anything. Like my girlfriend had that several times. So I was super cautious. And so they couldn't even point to a certain item that was bad. They just sort of took a step back and were like, we just don't like this. This
makes us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they have stuff that's like literally glorifying hatred and violence against turfs, where they have like turf stompers stickers that's like for stomping on turfs. They have one that just says, fuck you, turfs, and it has like a Furby holding a gun pointing it straight ahead. Jesus. They have one that says like turfs need to choke or something. They have all this, and there's like hundreds of good reviews on these products and stuff, and but I guess turfs aren't like a protected group, so it's okay.
This is insane. I mean, that there's so many insane things that we've been dealing with over the past few years. So it starts to feel a bit cliched almost to say, this is crazy. But like the fact that they would allow something that quite literally does glorify violence. Like I'm a proponent of free speech. You're a proponent of free speech. Usually when people ask me, like, is there a line that you have, where do we draw the line around free speech on Twitter or whatever? And I'll say, something that is like an overt violent threat, which it seems to me that those kinds of messages, those kinds of products would constitute overt threats of violence against, maybe they don't qualify TERFs as a protected group, but it's still a specific group of people. You know, it's supposedly, of course, it's not applied in this way all the time, but supposedly it's, you know, radical feminists, and in reality, it's people who are critical of gender identity ideology, essentially.
Yeah, it's like they have their policy completely backwards. Like, yeah, it should be just like bad to glorify hatred and violence against anyone, but you know, it's probably worse if it's like an oppressed group, but it's still bad regardless. So you think that it would at least apply to like any innocent people. Just because they're protected doesn't mean they're necessarily guilty and worthy of glorifying hatred and violence.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder under what circumstances it would or should be acceptable, according to these people, to glorify violence or threaten violence. I mean,
yeah,
like, you know, women, you would think, you would think they wouldn't want to glorify or encourage violence against women, and many of these so-called TERFs are indeed women.
Yeah, they're not really clear on anything. And again, I mean, nothing even that I had on there it was just like alluding to the fact that there's two sexes, and just that enough. Just like the whiff of that from like the people at Etsy wasn't, I guess, kosher for them. So
what were the products that you were selling on Etsy?
So I had 4 main like images. One was just like, it says like reality's last stand in text, and hanging from various letters is like there's a male symbol and a female symbol. I had one that was like a shield logo that said reality's last stand, again with like a male and female symbol. I had another one that just said like defender of reality with like a male and female symbol. See a trend here. And then the last one was just the cartoon that I did that Elon Musk tweeted out like a month ago. So it's just a political cartoon, no violence or anything. It's just like, you know, talking about how the left moved left and dragged the center so far that I'm now like considered center right. Like that's all that cartoon depicted. That's it. That's literally all that I've sold on there. So.
I wonder actually, can you talk a little bit more about that cartoon? I know that the cartoon sort of went viral after Elon Musk tweeted it. And I mean, talk to me about your political progression a little bit, and how that connects to that cartoon, you know, and why that cartoon resonated with people also, I suppose.
Yeah. So I assume a lot of people probably saw it. But just for those who might not have, it's this cartoon, and it says, you know, it's like my political journey, and it has like 3 different dates. It's got like 2008, 2012, and then 2021. In 2008, it has like there's a political spectrum. It's got conservatives on the right. It's got me, who's center left, and then to the left of me is an individual that's just labeled my fellow liberal, and everyone's just smiling. Then it goes to like 2012, and you know, the conservative is staying in the same spot. I'm staying in the same spot, but the person to my left has began sprinting to the left, so they're dragging out the center of the political spectrum with them. So relative to, you know, since I stayed in the same spot, the center is now sort of shifting, and it's almost going to pass me, and I have like an expression of just like, oh my, what's going on? And then in 2021, the last sort of part of it, it's got like the person who ran to the left is so far out to the left now. They're now labeled a woke progressive. I'm now considered center right because the center has been dragged past me. The woke progressive is calling me a bigot, and then the conservative is just saying lol at his end, thinking it's all very entertaining. So I mean, it really just is an encapsulation of my views, you know, on a set of really core values, not like everything. If you were to look at a certain political issue, you could probably draw a very different, you know, series of events and how the right and left moved relative to each other. But it was really my feelings on issues like, you know, free speech, how this was generally a left-wing position of speaking truth to power, and it was, you know, seen as just a way for minorities to be able to get their voices out, and it was one of the most valued things. That's why I consider myself on the left very much. And now you see like people on the left talk about free speech and like scare quotes like so-called free speech, and you know, they kind of disparage it almost, or whether they try to dismiss it as like this sort of right-wing phenomenon that's really bizarre. Then there's things like, you know, race issues, Whereas I'm always of the opinion that you treat everyone as individuals, content of their character rather than the color of their skin thing. Now we see the sort of the progressive movement to, it's based in group identity and group benefits and at the expense of individual rights and things like that. And then women's rights, what is a woman? We don't even know now. Maybe men can be women, all that stuff. So on those three main issues, like, I think the left has just gone totally bonkers out to the left. And even though I'd stay in the same position, like I've always had these values and I just carried them with me. They're no longer reflected on the left. They're sort of more center right in my view. So I have stood still the whole time, but I'm now kind of considered center right because of how far the left went. So that's kind of my political journey, I guess, standing still in a nutshell.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, I've recently been writing about leaving the left. And for me, because I was so far left, I actually did move towards the center. So when I say I left the left, a lot of people will respond to me and be like, you didn't leave the left left you. Or they'll say, I didn't leave the left left me. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about. And I see that to be true for a lot of people. But in my case, I think I did sort of leave the left because I'm not super attached to socialism anymore, although there are some policies that, would perhaps qualify as socialist policies, universal healthcare, for example, that I still support.
I might have like shuffled a little bit to the right, but not much.
But I guess, I don't want to identify with anything because I feel like there are right-wing policies that I support and, left-wing policies that I support and liberal policies that I support. And I'm just going to go with what I think is the best policy. But I wonder, what do you think? So you're drawing this cartoon of somebody on the left sprinting even further left, but what do you think the left even means now? I mean, at one time the left was primarily about labor rights, and and then there was other issues, civil rights, women's rights and stuff that went along with it, but it was primarily, as I understood it anyways, in like the 70s, 80s, probably even early 90s, to be about the labor movement and class.
I'm not sure what I would consider left and right anymore. I think there's like a major sort of reshuffling right now and redistricting of what it even means to be like right or left or Republican and Democrat. For me, like the biggest issues I have is like I can talk to people who are, I guess considered center left by whatever the left used to mean. My main divide right now is like woke versus unwoke or anti-woke. I mean, I just think, it's probably one of the main reasons I'm probably voting Republican the next election. And people would say that, me voting against wokeness is a single issue voter, but it's not like voting based on abortion or voting based on universal healthcare. Cause like this whole like woke stuff, it's like a lens that people are seeing so many aspects of society. It like talks about, free speech issues, race, what women are, it just touches on almost everything, and everything it touches just goes bonkers and is completely insane. So yeah, I'm voting against like a worldview, I guess, like a lens that people view reality, because I think it's incredibly damaging and really just literally insane. So that's sort of my dividing line.
Yeah, I mean, I feel I've never voted in an American election before because I've never lived in the U.S., but I do actually have American citizenship. I have dual citizenship, so I might try to vote in the next election. If I can figure out a state to vote in and how to do all that. And if I did, I would vote Republican. And for me, that's because I'm looking at certain issues that are very important to me, and seeing the Democrats, screw up on those issues in such a massive, massive way that I could never in good conscience vote for the Democrats, including free speech, including gender identity and women's rights. And, civil liberties in general. And they just, they just seem to me to have become such an irrational party and so heavily focused on virtue signaling over the reality of, like real life people and what is happening in their day-to-day lives and what's important to regular people.
Yeah, I think they've largely abandoned like the class issues, and it's all race now. They almost view all class issues like through this lens of race, where if they like solve racial disparities, it'll solve class ones. But I don't know. I think they have it kind of like the causation a little backwards there. Like, people tend to be poor, and poor people, if Black people are like disproportionately poor, like there's going to be disparities. But it's not like there's racism that's causing it. I think it's mainly a class issue that's causing a lot of disparities we see that's being viewed as systemic racism. Yeah, I think they've just lost the plot.
Right.
Reissue.
When I feel like these people's efforts to address the issue of race is quite superficial. Like it's sort of about plugging in a so-called POC into various visible positions of power and things like that. And really, it seems like a shuffling around of middle and upper class, overeducated people, and doesn't actually address the issues and inequalities and marginalization of poor people, including, of course, poor people of color and, immigrants and so on and so forth.
And even when they get like the left gets like a bread and butter issue just handed to them, like the Supreme Court leaked draft of potentially overturning Roe v. Wade, it's like this should just be like tee it up for them, like women's rights, just knock it out of the park. But then the whole woke ideology of gender stuff has made them completely impotent on even like capitalizing on these perfect things that they have largely built their names around, like women's rights, because now it's just, the vagina havers and all that stuff. It's just made them completely incapable of jumping on these issues and rallying around it. So yeah, they're not doing too well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, because in the last election, there was a lot of women who I know who are very concerned about gender identity ideology and its impact on women's rights and on kids, who still, hung on and voted Democrat because of the abortion issue. And then, I feel like the Democrats are going out of their way to lose all of those women who are going to, look at their statements and look at statements from Democrat allies like the ACLU and see women completely left out of the conversation, and every single other group named, like abortion rights are important for, people of color and people with disabilities and, people with vaginas, but also men.
Yeah, I mean, that was like, I think you're referencing that ACLU tweet that was like, yeah, they literally included like the LGBT community on there. It's like, are gay men and lesbians really disproportionately getting abortions? I can't even imagine a world how that could possibly be true. Like, because if you're a gay guy, like, well, you and your partner don't have to worry about getting an abortion. If you're lesbians, if miraculously one of you got pregnant, then that's interesting in and of itself. And if you did IVF or something, like, well, presumably you're not going to abort something you had IVF on. I can't see how it's possibly true. And then to leave women out, there are like 6 things, and women don't even make the top 6. It's completely insane.
It is insane. So you mentioned Reality's Last Stand earlier on. I understand you semi-recently kind of quit your so-called day job to work on the gender identity issue full time. And you moved to Nashville. Was all that stuff sort of like interrelated? Those decisions?
No, the move wasn't really related to that. I just kind of really liked Nashville when I visited it, so I decided to move here. And then along the way, I got to a point on my Substack where I was making just, enough where I could pay my rent and bills and feed myself. And I had wanted to do this for a while before, but I didn't want to have like nothing to fall back on. I can just quit my job and have, no way to support myself. But every time I would publish an article or a newsletter, I would get like a pretty decent amount of subscribers, but I couldn't do them as frequently enough. So I figured, like, if I could actually just work full time on this, like once I get to a point where I can at least support myself and not die, then I'll just completely jump over, so I can dedicate all my time, and then hopefully that growth curve will just increase. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been good. I kind of wanted to quit my day job and everything too, just because I wanted the freedom to not have my income controlled from above by somebody. Depending on their funding, I wanted to have something more secure. And that's how I felt for the first month or so after I went independent. But then with the whole PayPal thing and Etsy, it's really kind of spooked me a bit. Etsy's not a huge deal. It's just really annoying because I need to just take my merchandise and put it on, I don't know, Squarespace or something. And, there's some place that'll let me take my products. I didn't make a lot with my merchandise anyway. Every once in a while, I'll be like, I sold a mug. So it's just annoying. But then, like, for a payment processor to, cancel your subscriptions, there's a world of difference between, canceling a thing where I'm selling products and then severing the relationship I have between my donors. Because I can't just like bring my donors somewhere else. I'd have to send them an email, be like, will you resubscribe please to, support me? But there's going to be a drop off. And so that's a little horrifying, knowing that, I don't know, some weird policy, some intern can just like click a button and sever that. I'm glad it happened when I had, early enough when I hadn't come to rely on it for a huge section of income. So I'm just looking for another payment processor now that could hopefully, I don't have to worry about them at least, for the next 50 years until I die or something. But who knows? So it's a little scary, because if all my eggs are in that one, Substack or using one payment processor, you're really just a click away at any moment from not having any money anymore. So it's a little more stressful than actually getting fired from like a job or something like that. So
yeah, it is really scary. I mean, it's funny because I went independent quite some time ago and finally let go of all my extra various jobs to work full time on Feminist Current and then in the podcast, and then started my Substack and my second podcast and so on and so forth. And it's very liberating because, like you say, like you don't have to depend on a boss. You don't have to worry about getting cut off of your entire income if somebody decides they don't like your politics. But, at the same time, we're seeing people, Trump got cut off from everything. And, Trump isn't the most vulnerable person in the world financially, but, if they can do that to him, they can do that to anyone. And theoretically, they could cut an individual entirely off of income. I mean, in Canada, the Trudeau and the Liberal Party, they froze the bank accounts. Well, first they cut off the trucker people from their GoFundMe and wouldn't release all the money that they raised. And then they froze their bank accounts. I mean, I'm glad to hear that Stripe is in support of free speech, but all of that stuff made me feel pretty stressed, because I and plenty of people I know are dependent on places like PayPal or Patreon. Certainly, they're dependent on having a bank account. But I mean, who do you think is behind this? Like, who would be at PayPal, or what would happen at PayPal that would have led somebody to just cut you off like that, and also not give you a reason and really not offer you any recourse unless you sue or something?
yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure who's like in charge of all that stuff at PayPal, but it's happened to Ian Miles Chong on Twitter. He got his PayPal shut off too,
Recently?
months before mine.
Okay.
No, like maybe like 3 to 6 months ago, sometime in that window.
Mm.
But yeah, so that was a big thing too. And I get same situation, just like we can't tell you why unless you have a subpoena. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know it was a particularly woke organization until I went on their Twitter. And if you look on it now, like their banner, it just says like "open for all," and it's got all the rainbows, and it's the P and the open is the PayPal thing. I was like, my God, this is just like rubbing it in so much, like "open for all." After I just got booted off for no reason. Yeah, I mean, I don't know who's behind the scenes pulling these levers and stuff, but it's pretty scary. I mean, payment processors are just a whole other thing. Just because of the way people come to rely on this for income, it's just like this one pressure point that can always be used against you. I mean, if Stripe were to boot me off, which I mean, maybe they will. This happened with Patreon before, when they had the CEO went on Dave Rubin like years ago, telling him that, you know, all our terms of service only apply to things that happen on Patreon. You don't have to worry. We're very pro free speech. And then 2 years later, they kicked off, you know, Sargon of Akkad and some other people for stuff they did off Patreon. And that's what Sam Harris then led this like exodus from Patreon, because they just will update their terms of service and, you know, change their whole ethos, and then you're screwed. So, I mean, Stripe apparently is good. Someone reached out to Claire Lehman at Quillette to tell her that I don't know why they didn't reach out to me, that, you know, I'd be safe with Stripe. But what if they get bought out by someone, they get some new management? I mean, these tech jobs probably have pretty good turnover. So I have no idea if like their values that they're expressing now are going to be the same thing a year or 5 years from now. So I can only hope. Well, so I'm trying to maybe find a bunch of different options, and everyone's saying, "Oh, I gotta go crypto." It's like, well, I can't.
Well, that doesn't seem safe either. I mean,
you know, sure, I have like a Bitcoin wallet people can send it to, but you know, most people are still using credit cards and cash. So maybe in the future.
I mean, I guess it's good to diversify, but I mean, in principle, it's pretty scary, even if you find alternatives as an individual in your real life. I mean, we've been having this conversation around corporations or companies like, you know, Twitter, for example, because they became so heavy-handed in their censorship and their manipulations of the algorithm and their manipulations of facts and news and you know what counts as real news and fake news and what needs to be fact checked and what doesn't. And it was just so heavily biased, and we really still haven't found a solution. I mean, people keep trying to start new platforms, but they don't take off, and they certainly don't have the same power and reach that Twitter do. I mean, I wonder if you have any ideas in terms of what a solution or some solutions would be to combat this, you know, the power of big tech and the extent to which they're able to censor and to manipulate everything from news, information, elections, what you're allowed to think and say.
You know, I wouldn't say I know a whole lot about like the solutions to it. What is that? There's like a policy that's, you know, you can, if you're just like, I'm gonna butcher these terms here, like a telephone system, like they can't like cut you off. They're just like a service provider. They just host content, but they're not like an editor. They're not someone who's like publishing content. And there's some rule that I guess, you know, Trump had like threatened to enact it, but didn't, that would prevent places like social media platforms from censoring certain content, because they're just not like a platform. They're actually like sort of a publisher. And so they would be, you know, if you're a publisher, that means you would be held accountable legally for stuff that's on your platform. And so they would have to take it down. So they're kind of playing this middle ground now where they say that they're a platform, but at the same time, they're censoring content. So I'm not sure what I can't remember the law. It's like 230 or 130 something, some law.
Oh yeah, Section 230, I think it is.
230, yeah. I can't say that I've read like the whole thing. But I mean, I've heard people invoke that as something that could be used. I don't know why.
That's what they used in my lawsuit. That's why I lost my lawsuit against Twitter, because they somehow managed to play both ends of Section 230. You know, they're a publisher, but also they're not responsible for what other people publish. Yeah. But as a publisher, they're allowed to take things down that they don't like.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the legal nuances of why this is allowed to happen. The other solution that I'm hoping, you know, and it's a sad world when we have to rely on something like a benevolent billionaire to buy a system and to uphold free speech. But like, that's my holdout right now is this like, please Elon, buy Twitter, because, you know, you've seen like the libs of TikTok and the screenshots that have been shared and behind the scenes at Twitter about trying to get libs of TikTok banned. I'm sure they're probably doing it for other people like me. And it's just a nerve-wracking time to be in, because if someone were to shut down my Twitter tomorrow and Stripe were to get destroyed, like I'd be fucked. Like, really. Yeah. I'm glad that, like, you know, you lost your Twitter and you've managed to stay in the game and be relevant, and people talk about you and you're on Rogan twice and all that stuff. So that's really great. But there's a lot of people now, I see these like smaller accounts who are gender critical, who will say, you know, something that I would probably say, and then I look the next day and they're gone, like they've just been banned. Mm-hmm. And so I think that like Twitter's banning some accounts that are small before, you know, because banning them right now wouldn't really cause much of a, you know, splash, because not many people follow them. They'd probably get a lot of shit if they just like decided one day to, you know, to suspend my account permanently or something. So, but I don't think they would be opposed to it if they thought that, you know, it became a threat or something. But you know, these people with like, you know, because I'd never really thought I was going to be really threatened by that, just because what I say is like so straightforward and simple. Like, I'm not this provocateur. I'm not like a Milo character who's dunking on people. But I mean, it looks like there's at least some sort of, I'm in some kind of crosshairs, which is a little nerve-wracking. So,
yeah, I mean, it is weird because you do say pretty basic stuff and you're pretty heavily focused on the scientific end of things, and you're certainly not trying to troll or poke at people in, you know, in any kind of offensive way, or any way that could be construed as offensive. But apparently it is construed as offensive, so who knows? Yeah. I mean, I have managed to stay relevant, like, thanks to people who talked about my case in the media and covered it and so on and so forth. Although it's still, I mean, when I was banned from Twitter, I wasn't really using any social media besides Twitter in a real public way. You know, like I didn't have a public Facebook account. I didn't have a public Instagram account. I wasn't doing anything with my YouTube channel. I didn't have a Patreon. So I kind of had to start all that stuff from scratch. And that just makes you realize how vulnerable you really are, because, like, you know, if tomorrow I was banned from, you know, Instagram and Facebook and wherever else, then I would be fucked. Like, that's my whole job and income. Like, I can't work without these platforms, period. I
people say I should open a PO box so they can send me checks. It's just like, are we really in this position now? Or like,
yeah, it's totally crazy. I mean, it's funny because it's like I sort of thought the tides were turning, and then when this happened to you, I was like, oh crap, like, are we still doing this? Like, I literally had somebody sent me, I hadn't seen what was going on with you on social media, but somebody sent me a screenshot of some of your tweets, I think, and I was like, I thought this conversation was opening up. Like, it seemed like, you know, Ricky Gervais is talking about it, and, like, you know, obviously Matt Walsh just made that documentary, and, you know, people in the media, and certainly in comedy, and definitely people online and journalists, like, it seemed like people were becoming more bold in speaking openly about this, and I thought that meant we were becoming more protected from this kind of censorship. It started feeling easier to have these conversations, but maybe not. Like,
still think it is. Yeah. I mean, I think in the grand picture of things, I think things are getting a little easier to talk about and more people are talking about them. But there's just still the occasional instance of, I mean, I don't even know like how many ranks it has to go through for PayPal to make a decision. Like it could have just, there might be just like, did they delegate to these low ranking interns or something? I have no idea. Like it could have just been an angry intern that's just one day just like, I don't like him. Yeah, I'm not sure. So
it's hard to know what happened. I mean, people ask me all the time. Rogan's asked me, and he, I think, sometimes thinks, it's just random, and sometimes people think, it's just, you got reported too many times, so the system just shut you down, or it's just, some moderators who don't really know what they're doing. Like, I got the feeling like people, like Twitter was after me, and because I know that all of a sudden, my tweets were getting reported all the time, and a lot of my like old tweets, like tweets from like a year or so ago, were getting reported, and like I wasn't saying new things that were getting my account reported. It was like they were combing through my old tweets and systematically reporting things so that they would have an excuse to shut me down. And they obviously took, these random tweets that really weren't offensive at all, like men aren't women though, and saying the word
that's even a true statement according to like gender ideology, because if they define like women as anyone who identifies as a woman and man as anyone who identifies as a man, like it's true that if you were someone who identifies as a woman, you were not someone who identifies as a man. So I mean, it's a true statement what you said, even according to their view of what men and women are. So yeah, read it.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I talked over you there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, it's like if you're going, I know I've said this many times, like, it's like if you're going to insist that you're a woman and you're not a man, then you have to believe that a man is something and a woman is something, and that there's a difference between those things.
Yeah.
But then they won't tell us what the difference is or what those words mean. I'm like, why do you care so much about being identified as a woman if you don't know what a woman is, or if that word doesn't mean anything? I don't get it.
Yeah, that was the beauty of Matt Walsh's documentary. I think it was like a masterpiece. So
I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was hilarious. I mean, I obviously, to be transparent, and like I was pissed because of his commentary on Twitter. Like, I wasn't pissed about the documentary. I thought the documentary was really funny, and I would never tell somebody like, you should have made a documentary about feminism instead, or like, you should have been featuring these people instead. I mean, he can do whatever he wants. He, wanted to make this documentary, and he did, and he was successful in doing what he wanted to do. And he made good points. I was frustrated because I saw him tweeting that he had reached out to all these prominent feminists and everybody refused to work with him, which is bullshit, unless he's talking about, so-called liberal feminists. Like if he's reaching out to like Gloria Steinem or like Jessica Valenti or like Planned Parenthood or something like that. And, and sort of implying that feminists weren't really doing anything. They weren't really helping. They were sitting on the sidelines and whining. And that was frustrating because for those of us, and you've been doing this for a while too, so it's not just women, but, a lot of women have been just fighting so hard just to be heard, to be able to like have a meeting where they could talk about this, and getting like crazy attacked in really, really scary ways, getting fired from their jobs, their book deals dropped. I mean, my publisher dropped me, like being censored, not being able to get published, getting punched in some cases because they're at an event trying to have conversations about this. And then, for somebody like Matt Walsh, or, I've seen this from other right-wing men too, and even some right-wing women too. And this is not to disparage right-wing men or women, because there's a lot of right-wing men and women who are awesome. But to be like, why are the feminists talking about this? And like, why is no one asking this question? And we're all like, oh my God, we've been literally asking this question for 5 years now.
The only reason they knew to make this documentary is because of like the groundwork that's been set by a lot of people pointing out this contradiction about, the inability to define what a woman is. So
Yeah.
I mean, I see that for sure.
Anyway.
I do think it probably like helped blow open the conversation on a grander scale. I mean, you had to subscribe to like the Daily Wire, so I'm sure at some point, once the daily subscriptions to watch it trickle down, they'll probably start releasing it on more platforms just to get like the wider audience and the revenue. And then hopefully it'll have another surge or something where people can see it.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about this idea that, you know, it's the wrong person, it's the wrong narrative, it's coming from the wrong political end of the political spectrum. You know, we have to be honest, because I did see some radical feminists saying that kind of thing. You know, I was critical specifically of what Matt Walsh was saying in these tweets because I felt he was being dishonest and disingenuous and unfair and not, you know, giving credit to people who really deserved credit. But it wasn't for me like, you know, for me in general, it's not like, oh, well, I don't want right-wing people talking about this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really mind that much. I mean, if I had made the documentary, they would probably treat me just the same. I'm sure the people who are upset by it really don't see any daylight between me and Matt Walsh. They probably, well, one's religious and the one isn't, but otherwise they both. I mean, I've been called alt-right like all the time and super far right, even though it's completely false. So I don't know. I just think. I mean, maybe it hurts a little bit if it's someone on the super right or someone who's just like this completely outspoken conservative and has very conservative values and you know, as it pertains to like abortion or whatever. But no, I don't really mind that much. I mean, I'm glad it was made. The content of the actual documentary, I don't think it can be really criticized. It's not like Matt Walsh was putting forward like this strict religious front or something like that. Like you could probably watch it without even knowing that he's a Catholic or something. So I think it stands alone pretty well. People are going to just find any way they can to justify not watching it and write it off. So whether it was done by someone like even if Kara Dansky or something made it, they would just be like, oh, this is a right-wing turf, blah, blah, blah. Like they would just write it off. So, I mean, it's not going to matter. If they hate it, they're going to dismiss it for whatever reason they want to.
Yeah. I mean, that's the unfortunate thing is that, you know, the people who we would like to change their minds aren't going to really look at it, just like they don't read anything that we write or listen to anything that we say and continue to label us as bigoted and transphobic and what have you. I know that you're working on a book. Can you tell me about that? What is the book that you're working on?
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, it has to do with sex and gender. It's just basically it's going to be a pretty straightforward book that's aimed at just like the average American, maybe average American parent, just anyone who wants to get their mind around the whole issue of biological sex and gender identity, where they come into conflict, what the whole gender stuff is all about, what they're saying, what they believe, why it's harmful, what is biological sex, why did it evolve, how do we identify males and females across the animal kingdom. But I want to write it in just a very popular, engaging way, not lofty at all. You know, I don't think it's going to be super long. I mean, I can't imagine it being even longer than 200 pages. I want something that's really digestible, that where someone reads it, they'll have a pretty good grasp on what sex is, what gender ideology is doing, where it conflicts with the whole science of biological sex, why we should even care about this stuff in the first place, and then sort of give people the tools to sort of go into the world and enter this debate with sort of, you know, defended with or armed with some good reasons and some good arguments. So yeah, that's sort of what it is. Right now it's called, working title is going to be Reality's Last Stand, Reality's Last Stand, Gender Ideology and the Denial of Biological Sex. I think is sort of the running title, but who knows, that could change.
Awesome. Do you have any idea when it might be done / available-ish?
You know, I'm really going to try to get the whole manuscript done just by the end of the year. And then I have no idea how long like the editing process is going to take on that. I'm trying right now just to like wall off a certain amount of hours per day where it's just like deeply focused on this one task, because it's just so easy to do other things. And now that I'm fully independent, I have to like also work on my Substack, have some regular content coming out on there. So I'm actually trying to get articles on the Substack that are going to be turned into chapters, so I can kill kind of two birds with one. I have all the research, and I'll have a distilled version of like a chapter on my Substack that'll then be fully expanded into certain chapters. So that's kind of the idea of being able to have content coming out and also work on my book simultaneously. So I think it'll work, but
it's an enormous task. It's really quite hellish. I don't know how people, like, there's some people, Douglas Murray manages to keep producing these amazing books really regularly, and there's lots of other people, and I'm like, I don't know how they do it, man.
Yeah, I asked Abigail Schreier for advice, and she's like, you just need to say no to things.
Yeah,
podcasts, as I'm here. So, so I'm failed. Sorry, Abigail. But yeah, I mean, I am saying I used to like going on like, I don't want to disparage them, like smaller podcasts or whatever. Because I saw them as a good practice just to keep talking about things, but I just don't have time for those types of things anymore, because I need to get the book out. Something I've wanted to get out for a while, and I think I'm both sad that it hasn't been out already, and glad because I think I have a much broader, complete perspective of everything now. So it'll be easier to write in that sense. So I just need to get it done.
Yeah, it is. I'm really bad at saying no to things too. I have a lot of guilt, and I tend to want to say yes to everything. But you're right. You've got to. Anyway, I'm sure you're doing great. And
a book tour and a speaking thing, and that'll just be like a good launching pad for like a lot of other projects I want to do, and probably help Substack and everything too. I think the book is just going to be like a catalyst for a lot of other things. I just need to get it done.
Yeah. So, tell everyone where so you have a Substack, Reality's Last Stand. Where else can people find you and your work?
So, I mean, I publish a lot of articles on there, realitieslaststand.com. There's like a weekly newsletter that's me basically talking about the previous week's news with some commentary and breaking things down. It goes over the crazy stuff first, then there's like a sanity section where, you need to sort of, it's kind of like eye bleach, like, okay, there is some hope in the world. There's also like usually like a whiskey or spirit review at the end. And then there's like a weekly reading list I have as well. The articles are always free, just because I just think it's important information that I want to get out there, and also helps bring in new readers. So if you just want to subscribe for articles, you can get those for free, just an email. Support's always appreciated. Otherwise, Twitter, my handle is @SwipeRight, and that's WRIGHT. Right, it's my last name. I'm on Instagram here and there, but it's mainly just Twitter. So if you just follow me on Twitter and my Substack, you pretty much got everything.
Right on. Thank you so much for talking with me today. I hope to visit Nashville sometime soon.
You should.
Okay, well, thank you again. Good luck with everything. I hope to see you in real life again sometime soon.
Just let me know when you're back.
I will.
And maybe we'll come visit you in Mexico sometime.
Do it.
Cool.
Okay. Take care. Bye.